Okay, so just I suppose I'll go ahead and go over a quick agenda, and we made a quick agenda here, but this is going to be a pretty informal discussion. We're just going to do some brief introductions between myself, Garron, and Tunji for about 15 minutes. We'll each take about 5 minutes to just introduce ourselves, let you know a little bit about us, and then we have a couple of questions prepared, just kind of Q&A for us to start initiating some discussion, start talking to you all about this breakfast, and then we'll open it up to the audience to talk about any questions that you all have. And we're hoping that this can be a pretty informal discussion and chat as you all in New York get some breakfast and we talk about inclusion and diversity and research. So we'll start with some introductions. So just to give you some background on the three of us, so both Tunji, Garron, and myself, or all three of us, are part of the Bill and Melinda Gates Learning Engineering Postdoctoral Fellows. So you'll hear in a little bit about our different research projects, but we all kind of intersect at this thinking about learning and technology and diversity. And so all three of us have been kind of working together for the last about 1.5 years or so on our separate projects, but we come together and meet about once a month to talk about our individual projects, again, how they converge, and just trying to build a more diverse community when it comes to, again, the intersection of learning, technology, and diversity. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Tunji to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. And I welcome everyone again to this breakfast discussion. It's going to be informal. For an introduction, my name is Adetunji Adeniran, but people call me Tunji to make it. It's a short, meaningful form of my first name. So you can call me Tunji. And I have a background in physics electronics from Nigeria. I have a higher diploma in physics electronics from the Polytechnic Ibadan, and a postgraduate diploma in physics electronics from the Federal University of Technology, Akure. Later, I crossed into computing science. So I have a bachelor's in computing science, a master's in computing science from the University of Ibadan. That's the premier university in Nigeria. After this, I crossed to Scotland to have a PhD in computing science at the University of Aberdeen. So I finished my PhD in 2020 and started a postdoctoral research work with Carnegie Mellon University under the leadership of Professor Ken Kodinga. And my PhD research is around developing a computational matrix that can allow for assessing and supporting online collaboration in real time. So we developed this model that can be extended and generalized into other complex online learning platform. And this will help online learners to maximize socio-cognitive benefit of group learning. So, and currently I work on personalized learning application that has been they've been using it for to help tutors gain insight about the progress and effort of their math students, and the PL2 also recommend resources that can help tutors to help learners better more. So my contribution currently and the team's contribution currently is we are trying to extend the utility of PL2 to training tutors. So we are developing asynchronous training modules for tutors and math tutors specifically. And the contribution we are making is we're trying to bridge learning science research, findings in learning science research, we're trying to bridge it with practice in the classroom. So we comb research in learning science that gives recommendation about how substitute strategy to help learners, especially in the remedial situation. So we convert this into short modules of training, and to provide this awareness and knowledge to tutors. Perhaps they'll find it's reflective, and they can use it in their. Oh, is that all about my 5 minutes? Okay. So that's if you want to hear more about what we're doing in PL2 currently, we have a contact at the end in the presentation. So that's just my little pursuits in terms of looking for productive and interesting academic career paths. So that's where I am. Hope to move forward from there. Thank you, Garron. Or Jackie, up to you there.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and move on to Karen. Thanks, Tunji.
Hello, my name is Garron Hillaire. I was going to talk a little bit about a couple of different projects and efforts that I've been a part of that think deeply really about how to be more inclusive in these educational systems that we're designing. And so one of the first places where I really explored this concept was when I was working at CAS.org that really focuses on universal design for learning. Is that familiar terminology for folks around here? Yeah. So really it's about designing up front, considering learner variability. And I spent about 3.5 years working in that space. And one of the things that just really became impactful and important to me in that process was recognizing the roles that emotions were playing in the learning process for the students that we were working with. That led me out to the UK, the Open University, to do a PhD, where I focused on emotional measurement design. And then that led me to Justin Reich's lab at the Teaching Systems Lab, where we were working on equitable teaching practices for teachers, looking at simulation-based learning and thinking about how to design that system. But what I want to point out, what was great, a treat in Justin's lab, was to pursue a decolonizing learning approach to the platform that we were developing. And what I mean by that is, how do we build the technology so that communities can really leverage it to serve their own needs and their own purposes? So when we want to develop equitable teaching practices, how do we let all of the different teaching communities out there develop their own needs for equitable teaching? Not one monolithic solution of like, I have found equity, let me give you some, but rather a notion of identifying, how do I support you on your path and growth and development towards becoming a more equitable teaching workforce? So I felt like that was a treat, and I loved it. And in that work, it was really about, I saw it as a shifting of power. I feel like MIT is a wonderful institution, a lot of privilege, a lot of power, and using that resource to empower those around, like the country. So we're working across multiple states, and empowering all of these different teacher ed programs to do what was important to them. And I just think that when we talk about inclusion, I would encourage you to think about, where's the power? What power am I operating from, and how am I sharing that power? I think that would be a really good frame to think about, because I think frequently we don't get into these power conversations, and we're like, we're going to be inclusive, and it's like, yeah, but you still have all the power. So like, how inclusive is that, right? And in the learning that I did while I was working with Justin in his lab, that really developed that notion of, how do we start spreading some of that power? And that really is what attracted me to taking on the next initiative that I've just started, which is the Director of Strategic Development at Erediv. And our intention is to pursue a research agenda of creating an inclusive research and development community, where we're going to be taking the resources and the funding that we're going to be generating new programs from, and taking a really inclusive approach, where we're going to be working to build communities, building spaces, getting to people that aren't typically heard or seen from at the beginning of the process of R&D, and getting them incorporated at the decision-making level of what we should be focusing on and what we should be doing, all the way through to the product development. And as it's an inclusive R&D community, that means you're all included. So there's opportunities for you to participate. We're going to be actively recruiting, like heavily, over the next like 9 months. So I figured this would be a great place to let people know. You've got my contact information, and if you go to Eredif's website, there's actually some job postings. One I would draw your attention to is, we'll be forming some study groups that will actually be digging into topics that are focused on serving students experiencing poverty, Latinx students, and Black students. And the hypothesis that we generally operate from is those closest to the problem are probably in the best position to identify the solution. But it takes the community. It takes an inclusive approach. And inclusivity is not changing one dominant force for another dominant force. It's a way of shifting so that all voices that need to be at the table are there, all voices are heard, and they're incorporated and treated like on equal footing. So that's my perspective on inclusivity, and I hope it's helpful. Go get. Yeah, so I would say that there's no reason that we wouldn't think about people in non-US. I would say that the programs that we're operating towards launching will be US focused, but all of the work that happens in front of that is not specific to country or region from my perspective. So if you wanted to be a part of a study group, there's no reason that you couldn't be a part of that process. Yeah, and really what we'll be doing in those study groups is identifying the state of the art, the state of equity, and coming up with identifications of areas for potential programs. Well, thank you. I guess if I can't talk, I'll pass to Jackie, but I can't talk about decolonizing learning without giving a little bit of, Asiyam, Nishala Shashiyam, Choklamisan. I'm just saying hello to my friends and family in my native language.
Thanks,
Okay, Jackie.
Karen. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Jackie Cavazos. Just a little bit of background about me. I earned my BA in psychology from California State University, Fullerton, where I joined as a transfer student from community college. After that, I went on to the University of Texas at Dallas, where I earned my PhD in psychological sciences. So my first kind of introduction into learning and teaching was actually at the undergraduate level, where I tutored low SES middle schoolers. So I would go into their homes and tutor them in English and in math. And that was kind of my first introduction into both teaching and to the learning space and the learning community. My concentration, my focus in research for both undergrad and as a grad student were actually in face identification and face recognition. So I primarily studied race bias and how race bias impacts face identification in humans and in face recognition algorithms. We also studied in that context how things like disguise or image variation impacts face identification. So from then, I moved on to the current project that I am working on right now, which is at the University of California, Irvine, which is where I currently have my postdoc position. And here we focus mostly on inclusivity and diversity in collaborative problem-solving teams. So our focus is on students, college students, and trying to understand the racial and ethnic inequities that occur during collaborative problem-solving tasks and teams. And our approach is to use computational linguistics. So mostly text analysis to understand the conversations that occur between individuals and within teams during collaborative problem solving. And the idea is to try to understand how things like social and cognitive and affective processes are impacted within a team, how diversity impacts those different processes, and then how we can leverage that to try to create more inclusive teams, more diverse teams that are also productive. In that same vein, we're also interested in understanding the psychological outcomes that occur during collaborative problem solving, right? So how can we understand and improve things like social belonging, retention in fields, self-efficacy, and this all again centers around trying to promote inclusivity and diversity in teams, with the notion that we have a lot of teamwork that occurs in kind of the college space, the college setting, but then this also gets translated into the workforce, right? So one of the kind of core components of being a good workforce teammate is to try to be able to be good at problem solving and working with others, right? So trying to hone in those skills at the college or university level so that we can prepare our future workforce to have these skill sets once they enter into the workforce. So that's kind of a little bit about my background and my research and how I kind of view inclusivity and diversity. So with those introductions, we'll go ahead and jump into the Q&A session. So we prepared a couple of questions that we've been thinking about as we think about diversity and inclusion, specifically in the context of research and trying to promote inclusivity and diversity. So we'll go through these questions. Again, this is pretty informal, so if you have any questions or comments as we're going through these, we'll go ahead and take turns, the three of us answering these questions. But afterwards, if you have any input, feel free to go ahead and either on Zoom, raise your hand, or Garron and Tunji can see you live and you can go ahead and ask questions. Garron and Tunji, if people ask questions in person, if you guys don't mind, go ahead and repeat the question before you answer or before they answer, just so that we can hear you all on Zoom as well.
I think I'll just run with the microphone if everyone raises their hand so they can just speak.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with, what does inclusivity mean to you? Tunji, if you want to go ahead and take this one away.
Well, I will say it in my view. Well, and I believe inclusivity is about seeking out and valuing and understanding our differences in terms of experience and knowledge, and being able within the team to exploit this and maximize its utility within the team to promote the competitive advantage of the research team. So I see that inclusivity is in the picture because the research team is continually getting diverse in terms of composition within it, and so that's what's one of the things that makes the concept of inclusion to be getting bigger in the picture. You are because we come from different background, and at different side of the divide, technological divide, digital divide, cultural differences, and many like this. When we come together within the team, so we have different view and perspective to an approach to things, and these has to be put into consideration to effectively work together for the to achieve the goal of the team. And let me ask Jackie also, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think, oh.
Oh, go ahead,
Garron, if
Jackie.
you want to.
I want to hear your thoughts, Jackie.
Okay, I was going to say that I find this question to be really interesting because one of the things we try to study is how to make teams more inclusive, and that we have learned can mean different things to different people, right? You might feel included in one space and somebody else might not feel included in that same space. So I think it's hard to kind of put an objective lens on what inclusivity means. But to me, when I think of inclusivity, I think we all know that feeling when we finished a project or when we entered a room and we've had a discussion and we feel like that was productive, that was exciting, I felt included, I felt like my voice mattered, and like I had an opinion that other people thought was worthy of listening to or even putting into action. So I think kind of taking that subjective lens into inclusivity, I think it's something that we all feel, right? We know when we feel included, we know when we feel like we're a part of a team, and we feel like our opinions and our thoughts matter. And I think going back to kind of what Garron said earlier, this idea of power, when we feel like power is shared, when we feel like we have the power to speak up and say something, even if it's not going to go the way that we want or our recommendation isn't going to be put into practice, at least it's an option, right? It's a viable option that others are thinking about and really dissecting and considering. I also feel like inclusivity, to me at least, just means being nice, being a good person to others, letting others be a part of the space as well, especially if you know that they would otherwise be not privileged to that space or maybe even shy to speak up and say something. The fact that you can go ahead and go out there and say, hey, be a part of this team and you are included, you are you are thought of in a way that's important in our team, in our group, or in whatever context. I think that really kind of highlights the essence of what it is to be inclusive and to try to include others in any work, school, or team related context. But go ahead, Garron, you can go ahead and
Yeah,
answer
I
the
just
question.
want to add to what you were just saying and build on that notion of power. And I just want to just point out, like, let's look in this room, like, look around. Like, if we got into different conversations, we would have different starting positions of power, right? Like, and if you feel like there's a conversation that you could enter where I'll have a lot of power in that conversation, I'll have a lot of strength that I can draw on. I think that a good question to ask yourself is, are you having some moments of caution and checking in and checking your privilege and thinking about, like, is this what it feels like to give up and cede some of that power to be inclusive? So as you get into some of those, as you come from a power position, you should feel a little bit uncomfortable. Because right now, I think we can all agree that we're not wonderfully, perfectly inclusive in every interaction that we're having today. And so if we're going to become inclusive, that is going to require some disruptive interactions. And those disruptive interactions are going to be felt in a more impactful way from those that have power, that are willing to cede power in those situations.
This one, what I want to push out a question from there, and like everyone says, inclusivity, being inclusive and promoting inclusion within the team. Oh, we are different. We have different capacity and abilities within a research team. How will senior researcher team leader manage trying to be inclusive at the same time trying to meet targets with respect to deliverables of the team? Because you can do this, and I'm sure he can do this. He just come and I am not sure what he can do. He has, and we need to deliver, we need to publish, we need to be building up, we need to, so it's better I push it to someone. And one of the things that makes you feel inclusive within the team is being able to contribute to the team, knowing that you are doing something. So how will you manage this as a team lead, trying to promote inclusion at the same time trying to make the team function in terms of productivity?
Jackie, are you ready to go to the next slide? Or are there questions or thoughts from the audience on what inclusive means to you?
Yes, I'll just read kind of a thought on one of our audience members through Zoom. So that I like the idea of disruptive interactions, seeing and ceding power, and the empathy that requires taking the extra effort to create space for others to engage, which I think is really important. And I think it echoes a lot of what we're saying here is make the space for others, right? Especially if you're in a position of power to be able to make that. Or even if you're not, right? If you feel like you're at a level with a peer with somebody else, you can also take that initiative to create that space. But I'll go ahead and jump into the next question. And the next question is there a time, place where you felt included, and what are some examples of this? So I'll go ahead and start this off, and then Garron and Tunji, you can jump in with some thoughts and examples of your own. I will say, I think I've been pretty lucky in both my undergrad, grad, and now postdoc career that I have always seeked opportunities and been in spaces where I feel included, I have felt included. And I think that it's something that I've gained perspective on, where I've noticed now going through these different teams and groups, how much people have made an effort to try to make me feel included and what that looks like. So I think one of the first times that I felt really, really included was actually my first day as a graduate student. I had joined my lab. My graduate advisor, Dr. Alice O'Toole, is amazing, is stellar, but she was talking with the other lab mates that I had, and they were talking about a project that had been going on months and months before I even arrived, but everyone was giving their opinions on this particular project, the ins and outs, the details, and so forth. And at the end, I was obviously like writing notes feverishly, but at the end, she turned to me and she said, Jackie, do you have any thoughts on the project? And she said it in a way where it didn't make me feel intimidated, like I was being tested, right? Like, have you been paying attention? Do you have anything to contribute? But in a genuine way of like, I'm really curious as to what is your thought on this? Do you have any input? And I felt a sense of, a kind of a sense of hesitancy from others, like, oh, that's interesting that she would ask her opinion. She just got here, but not in a bad way, but just like, oh, I'm curious, what is she going to say? And speaking personally, I'm a very much an introverted person, and I tend to only speak up when I'm asked to, but I was really thankful that she would actually take the time to say, I'm interested in what it is that you're saying. So I ended up telling her my thoughts on it and where I thought that we could kind of tweak the project a little bit. And it felt good to know that in this new space that I was in, people were making a space for me, not just people, but the PI, right? And so her making an effort to say, Jackie is new here, she is going to be joining us, but her opinion is valid from the get-go. Let others also make that space for me. And I think it turned out to be an amazing, amazing lab. So I think people would have made the space regardless in that context, but just to have her leadership, her kind of initiate that, creating that space, pulling out that chair for me and letting me be a part of the table, I think helped others. And I think it created a community within our lab to say, do this for the next person, right? So that when the new grad student came in after me, we all did the same for that person. So I think as a leader, she created the space where she was going to initiate this inclusivity, and that kind of trickled down into all the other grad students, all the undergrads, to make sure that we did the same thing for the next person. And I have nothing but wonderful things to say about that lab. So I think I hold it really near and dear to my heart, but I think it showed me an example of what it is to start a team, start a process with inclusivity, and how that can come from leadership. But Garron and Tunji, I don't know if you have any other thoughts or examples on that.
Yeah, I have a fun anecdote that I wanted to share on this question. So you're all at a conference right now. I'm sure you got a goodie bag or something with like things. No goodie bags. Okay, you got some sort of like kit, or even if it's just a program, you get a little package when you show up at a conference. It was about 3 weeks ago. I was in Denver at the Education Leaders of Color conference, and we got our little goodie bag. And I'm just going to show you. These socks were in the goodie bag right here. Okay, so these socks, I love these socks. These socks come from 8th Generation, a company created by Louis Gong. And on the socks, it says Nooksack, which you would say Nook Sack, right? Which is the nation that Louis Gong is from, coastal Salish, just like myself. I'm at an Education Leaders of Color conference. I'm going to the Indigenous Scholars table, and yet again, I'm the only one there, right? That's like a common experience for me. And I open up my little package, and I get these socks, and it's like there's like a little coastal Salish representation in the conference, and it gives me a conversation point where I can like talk to everyone. And I'm like, Nooksack. Actually, let's do this really quickly. Can you repeat after me? Nook. Can you say Nook Sack? That's the name of the nation, Nooksack. What it actually means is the home of the bracken fern. So if you go down the Nooksack River and you turn the bend and you see all of these ferns, that's where the people were living. So the Nooksack tribe or Nooksack nation is people that live near the ferns. And I got to have that conversation with a lot of people, and that felt really very like empowering, where there was a piece that I could really identify with and have like a deep connection with. And it's an inanimate object, right? It's socks, right? And just what that meant to me was so much. In part because, let me say, Louis Gong made the 8th Generation company so that there would be an Indigenous run business that was making profits from Indigenous art and supporting Indigenous artists, not having some major corporation appropriating like designs and making money off of it. So he's doing good work. And when the pandemic hit, he stopped delivering his artwork and he got K95 masks distributed to all of the nations in the Pacific Northwest. And he used all of his shipping power to do something meaningful for his community. And again, this is where we need to think, always go back to how do we empower communities? And again, socks. It's like socks that like makes this connection for me and just feels so meaningful and made me feel like I had a clear place in that conference. So funny little story.
Great story. And is there a time and place where I felt included? And well, from where I'm coming from and experience I've had, I have been in group that I have the probability of feeling opposite of included in the group. But fortunately, my PhD supervisor, that's Judith Mastoff, and even where I'm working currently, it's been a good experience and feeling so in terms of being included. So I was talk specifically when I was just starting my PhD. It was like I was very anxious, and I'm not sure when I'm talking. I'm not sure Professor Judith is comprehending what I'm saying. I'll be wondering, and after the meeting, I'll be wondering, have I made sense in that meeting, and all those things like that comes up as in first 2 weeks of my being in Scotland. But Professor Judith was like, she was just like I can call her more than a supervisor. She understands this, and she was able to settle me down better. At the time, she made correction of a lot of things in the way I do, but the way she would say it would be very funny. And the power distance from where I'm coming from, the distance, the power distance between supervisor and the student is wide. And the power distance here or in the UK is a bit closer. You understand? So sometimes the way I want to address you, if I address you the way culturally the way I'm coming from, I feel freer. If you don't allow me to address you that way, I am not sure if I'm doing the right thing. Then that was my problem then, if she just left me to address her the way I want to address her so that I can be free, you understand? So she was like able to understand the where I'm coming from, and made me relax. And throughout those 4 years, as in after some time, I felt included and I was free, and I was able to get more of the culture in Scotland also, and that helped the success of my PhD. That's an experience of where I felt at least included. If it has been otherwise, I might have a problem. It might be a problem then to complete or do the PhD successfully then. And currently where I am, the experience is just like I have a kind of quiet and gentle team lead that will just allow you to say whatever you want to say and give you just a tip of comment that will keep you run for the next couple of weeks. So this has also made me feel like this place is I felt included. So that's few experience. I can many other places that I have felt opposite of inclusion, but sometimes I always understand that like I said, there are other things that the team wants to achieve, and it's not all about what you're feeling, but at the same time, equity is also something that will help the team to move better. Yeah.
Great, so we can go ahead and move on to the next question. I do want to be kind of aware of time right now, but if we want to go ahead and kind of run through some examples of these, and then maybe just make sure we have time in case there's other questions or others have comments. But Garron, if you want to go ahead and take over this one.
Sure, yeah. So earlier we were talking a little bit about when you're in a position of power, there's the need to cede power. But there's another side of that too. There's a time when you maybe don't feel empowered and you need to step up and you need to be able to articulate what some of your needs are and be able to communicate that in a way where even if somebody wanted to cede power, if they don't know what's needed, what are they going to do, right? So we wanted to put this question in as the other side of that coin and sort of ask people and challenge people to think about times when they need to include themselves and step up into those conversations. So it's kind of hard to give open and public conversations around that type of interaction. But I can say that, you know, one of the experiences that I've had that felt very, very positive was working in Justin Reich's lab, and I feel like I can openly and talk about this. And I'm looking at him, and he can nod, yeah. And that we were an equity lab. We were working on equitable teaching practices. So the topics that we're constantly getting into are personally driven and connected by almost everyone in that lab. And I think that one of the things that I found really, really productive with Justin in that situation was anytime I saw anything that I felt like we needed to think about how to structure and respond to and distribute power within that work, I would directly talk to Justin about it. And literally every single time, Justin would be like, I'm so glad that you are directly talking to me about this, because so many people are not feeling comfortable going into those conversations. And I would even tell everyone every single time I talk to Justin, he is super responsive and supportive and does what we need to do to address whatever's going on. But not everyone is still comfortable with that. And so I think that there's a component of this, and it can't all be on the shoulders and responsibility of people that don't feel included. But I think there is a component of, if you find a way to step up, there are people that are around that will help you. And you can quickly identify them by sort of stepping up and seeing how they respond. And if they're very supportive and responsive, great, keep doing that. But it's definitely a risk. You're definitely putting yourself out there, and you're going to be vulnerable. And I'll say this, that from my perspective, when I know I'm going to put myself in a state of vulnerability, I give myself a little bit of time before that interaction to sort of collect my thoughts and relax. And I give myself a lot of time after that interaction where it's the rest of the day off, right? So that's like, if you're going to get into a difficult power conversation, you need to give yourself some recoup time, because the worst thing you can do is put yourself out there, have a negative experience, and then have to drop into a critical meeting in 5 minutes, where you have to deliver and do your job, because you're not going to be in the right headspace depending on the outcome of that meeting to have a really critical meeting after. So I'm just going to encourage you that if you need to be stepping up and engaging in that type of conversation, give yourself some time for preparation, give yourself some time for recovery, and don't overlap critical things in that space.
Yeah. I won't say much. You've said it all, and it's pushing yourself out, and it's risky. You might get a negative feedback, and like you said, I'm also very sensitive. Like, such feedback can go through a whole day, even with you, and to go into a critical meeting after that might be detrimental. And so that's correct, that you give yourself time, push yourself out, and take the risk. And supportive people can give you positive feedback, even if what you're the initiative or something you are putting out might not be totally what is what the team wants or something like that, but a corrective or critical feedback will help, and it will help you to move on and get the right direction. So I think I am with what you just said. Jackie, is there any other thing you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll just add something really quick. I know we have to wrap up for the keynote, but I'll keep it short. When I think of including yourself, also make sure you give yourself time and space to include yourself in things like when you apply for jobs, when you apply for fellowships, anytime that you apply, that's a chance for you to include yourself in the room. So a lot of the times I've seen myself very hesitant to apply to any kind of job or space where I feel like maybe I won't be included or accepted or I'm not qualified. But including yourself also means giving yourself the chance to be in that room, in that space, even if you feel like maybe you're not going to be a good fit, apply to whatever it is that you're thinking about, because that's a chance for you to include yourself in that space, in that room. So I'll go ahead and just leave it at that. And I know, again, we have to wrap up. I'll leave this next slide up for our contact information. If anybody has any additional questions or thoughts, please feel free to reach out to the three of us. I think I speak for Tunji and Garron too, that we're more than happy to get any kind of emails or messages revolving around this topic or related topics, and we're happy to respond accordingly. Garron and Tunji, any last thoughts before we close this off?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we open the space to say, like, if there's something like critical about this topic that you're going through or experiencing, we sort of said we'd commit to like being really responsive over the next couple of days with emails. So if you're to shoot us an email, we'll make sure that we're monitoring and responsive for it. So if something's like you're going through this conversation and you're like, hey, there's something like pretty critical and difficult that I'm going through right now, we just wanted to make sure that you know that we're going to be responsive and available for those types of communications. Just wanted to put that out there.
Great, thank you.
Great.